All right, hello and welcome to the KubeBuilder Controller Runtime and Controller Tools meeting for Thursday, February 25th, 2021. As a reminder, this is being recorded and will be uploaded to YouTube, so don't say anything you don't want recorded for all of posterity. It looks like we have quite a few things on our agenda today, so I think the first one is from Phil. So Phil, do you want to take us away?
Yeah, I'll do that. All right, so this is, I think I demoed this a couple months back, and I've spent some time on it. It's using the customize functions as kind of a way of getting abstraction when generating configuration instead of kind of the low-level semantics, commenting and uncommenting patch files. And so I'll go through a couple of examples like from the user side of how you'd use this. It can be either used standalone. So I'll cd into the config gen example standalone, right? And so again, the intent here, by the way, can everyone see my shared screen, my terminal?
Yes.
Okay, great. So the intent here, right, is that to provide kind of this simple experience where instead of having a bunch of configuration that some of which gets generated and some of which gets scaffolded and some of which users shouldn't change and some of which they should, and to change high-level things such as whether webhooks are enabled or Prometheus is enabled means like changing multiple different files with uncommenting and changing values. Instead of doing that, like let's pull it out into what the end user would kind of how they think about this. So that's what this file is up here. It's just that expression of like a project directory here and then like the image, right? And then the rest kind of gets generated. And so you do something like this, where you'd run this command. See if it still works, right? And then it spits out all this. So this is kind of like a programmatic way of just invoking it. And then you can write that to a file or write that to apply or something like that. And then it has kind of this cute little feature here, which you shouldn't leverage too much. But if you want to do something like I'll patch this output, right? And you want to simply just say, okay, I want the replicas to be different or the CPU or memory to be different. You can just hand a list of additional files, and those will be interpreted as patches. And so you could so you can see that the replicas gets patched there. So this is kind of like the simple way that a user might interact with this when they're first either doing development and just want to get it working. They might use this standalone approach. And then the question is like, how does this then relate to maybe the customize workflow and the sophisticated stuff we've already kind of developed, or you want variants and you want sometimes, certificates to be enabled and generated for local testing, but in the cluster you want cert manager running or something like that. And so here we have using that exact same format, but as a customized transformer. In that command, the KubeBuilder alpha config command here can actually work just as a customized function. There's a couple ways customized functions work. This is kind of the most mature and kind of well understood and well documented approach, which would be, it looks like a couple steps, but effectively this just creates a little script with a particular name in a particular location that invokes KubeBuilder config alpha. And so now it's going to read from standard in rather than from that file. And so this configuration is in a customized transformer here, and this is just a regular customized file. And this is the transformers field. So you can specify resources here. You can do label selectors, annotations. You can do config map generators, set the namespace field, write patches. So this works just like a normal customized thing, but with the KubeBuilder config gen operating against those resources in that context. And so rather than just being a pure generation command, as I demonstrated before, it actually reads from standard in resource files and can operate in the context of other files existing, right? So here I do something like install it as a plugin, and then I'd build it. Of course, customize command not found. No problem. I got right in the instructions right here, installation for customize. So we're good, I think. Okay, so there you can see that it generates that same set of configuration here, but from a customized context. And so that would mean you could, like, if you wanted to patch this, you'd say, you know, patch files or something like that. You could use this from a base. You could use this as a base. You can use bases or resources to pull in other things. And so, like, what is a more sophisticated instance of this look like? Well, because the way these are designed is to operate in the context of other resources that may already exist, I have a demonstration of how you might extend this, right? And the way you extend this, the architecture is through a composition approach where you compose additional mixins on top that can change the output, right? So it's sort of like the customized layering model, but with abstraction rather than like low-level patches. So in this case, we have the KubeBuilder configuration here, but then we have this like basic extension that we list as a second transformer. And that basic extension sees the output from KubeBuilder and then operates on that before providing the final output. So in this case, I'm not sure if that's installed. Let's see. Yeah, and that's not actually totally shocking because something got messed up in my environment. So I'm going to do a quick, I'm going to see if this works quickly, but it's possible it won't. I'll come back to this because clearly I screwed something up in my local environment. But the idea here is that this second extension will be similar to the KubeBuilder project. We'll just run from customize. And so users can combine different sorts of extensions for different types of environments. And I have two examples of how you write these. There's a framework to help making writing them simple. The first one uses like a way more familiar to Helm and customize users, which is you define like patches here, and the patches can be templatized from some API spec, right? So in this case, we have an API that has replicas, and then you have this replicas field, and then you define a template, and then it pulls out the replicas. And then you have like a selector for what that patch is. So in this case, it would say the whole extension does something very simple, which is apply this patch, setting the replicas from the input to a deployments named controller manager. You can do more sophisticated stuff like this one, where instead of just operating on patches, you maybe do something lower level. And so in this case, this does the exact same thing, but it operates on a list of resources rather than just defining resources and patches, and uses that same sort of selector approach where it finds a deployment and controller manager out of that resource list. And then for each match it finds, it goes and says, look up the spec.replicas field and then set its value this way, right? So this would allow you to potentially do stuff like iterate all over a bunch of resources first and generate patches based on other resources you found, right? So find this resource annotated with this value, get its name, then wire its name into the field of this other resource here, right? So like the way we do name prefixing, for instance, you could do more sophisticated versions of that. If there's a secret that's generated and you wanted to get the secret's value, base64 encode it, put that in a field of one resource, and then wire the secret's name into another resource, that could definitely be done using this approach because it's more dynamic. Real quick, like what are some of the things that this API provides? In this case, here's an example of like how you would use this to enable webhooks. So in the default way with customize to enable webhooks, you go in and find this particular comment in a particular customized file, and then you uncomment it. And I think you may need to do that in a couple different places. And then you may need to just make a decision about whether you're doing certificate manager or something else. In this case, we just define components. And so you, enable webhooks this way, or you enable Prometheus, or web conversion webhooks, because like those are enabled per resource. That involves a little more here. In this case, disabling auth proxy is done here like this. You can do things like just have CRDs. And in this case, you disable namespace, controller manager, and RBAC generation. And this actually supports using component config as well. So I think component config is one of those things that requires like changing a couple different files and multiple patches and that sort of stuff. And so this actually just has it as a high level value, where if you want to use component config, you'd create like this component config file, reference it, and then it would generate the configuration based on that and wire in that component config. So that's kind of the high level. The way it's implemented is done using a couple different things here, where it's a combination of pretty sophisticated stuff like a controller gen piece that generates the CRDs from the controller tools, or we have another one that does cert generation and will wire in certs for development. This has been a really sticking point for some people I've worked with, where it took them like a day just to get all the certificate, like the different stuff installed and configured correctly, due to a combination of complexities around like getting their certificate manager right and the customized config uncommented and all that stuff. So this is an alternative there for development. There's also templates and patches for the basic stuff. So this is the how we generate a lot of the resources is through these sort of template files, which are compiled into the binary in patches. And these are pretty similar to the what Kustomize provides today. I tried to copy that approach as much as possible. And then a couple other pieces here, like sorting at the end. So that's the demo update on this. I know there were some questions in the PR about how extension works and how this is run. I'd love to field those now if anything was unclear about how you would extend this using this approach through composition to layer on like operator SDK, for instance. Like this would be operator SDK, right? Or something like that. And it would compose with this.
Could I make a few questions?
Yeah.
Okay. The idea, I think, is great. The patch stuff could solve a lot of problems, like people have patches for development environment, patches for production environment. So I think this is nice. The idea of we be able to write on disk also solve the need for other peoples as well. So I'll make just a few questions. Angie, I really believe that this has too much value. One thing, just to confirm my understanding, the first example would be the way that we can replace the config director that we have now in the KubeBuilder, right? And the second example is the way that we could extend and create plugins and provide the value for the tool.
Right. The second example, I mean, there's other ways like it that we could do extension, but the second example is like kind of my preferred mechanism for extension, which is through composition rather than like plugins in this particular case. Like plugins make sense in certain contexts, but if you can get away with just composing two things, I think that's oftentimes preferable.
But in the future, of course, in the future, we could use the second example, like to create, I mean, when I say small projects, like the community could contribute with small projects, just for we patch things and address new templates and address things like that.
Yeah, with the second, so one nice thing about the second example is, I think you're right, where like, if there's a feature request that says like, can you can you make the configuration generated this way, right? Like whatever it is, like let's say the cert thing, right? So I happen to include the cert installation there, but let's say I didn't, and we didn't want to include that as a feature. And someone said, can you make it so that it's simpler to do webhooks for development by automatically just configuring it for me for my development environment? We could, instead of implementing it, we could say, you can like copy this, copy this example here, go, build a plugin, and then you can generate the certs here and wire them in, and then publish it, right, someplace, and then we could have a KubeBuilder page, right, which has a list of popular plugins or functions or whatever these are.
Okay, then my other point is like, I saw that you are using the controller chain and you are generating the CR as well. So if I would like to add specifications to my custom resource, I would need to do patches as well for the control chain.
Yeah, I don't think that changes much from what the flow today, in the sense that today you just like, I believe that config is generated from controller tools, so we don't encourage users to directly modify the output of that file, and you would do a customized patch, and so that would be like exactly the same, in the sense that you'd end up here, right, with patches.
Yeah. I think the only thing, like, okay, we don't have all options yet. It's a proof of concept in stage. I understand that, of course. It's just to prove that it's possible to do all this stuff. But I think, for example, now, if we put all custom resource, if you put the custom resource in the same file, for example, the way that we are drawing out the files would not be compatible with the making file targets, the controller chain. Also, we set in the making file. So, for example, Go V2 uses one version, Go V2 supports another version. So we would need also write the files in the same way that we write today, and let the control chain generate the CRs directly. Do you know what I'm trying to say?
I don't think so. Let me open it up. So like today we have this, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Then look at the samples, for example. If you go in the samples, we have the custom resources. Okay.
Yes.
So first, if you look in the making file, you'll see that we run make manifests. And then we generate the manifests according with the configuration. Like we scaffold, for example, the CRGs or the webhooks using one API, and then the user uses the targets to generate the files.
I assume we.
Go ahead.
Oh, I assume we'd end up needing to do a different, like, scaffolding version or something to support this, right? Like this would, if when we adopted config gen, we'd end up with a different scaffolding version,
Sure.
completely different, like a different definition of make manifests or whatever.
Yeah, you know what? Here's how I kind of think of this. Like in the battle days before controller runtime, there's like one cut at providing what KubeBuilder provides today was code generation, right? Where we scaffolded it out like a bunch of files for informers to get instead of having libraries, right? And so that meant users had a bunch of stuff on disk, and they had kind of this dance. They had to understand like what stuff did we scaffold for them, what stuff could they change, and then we moved to controller runtime as as these libraries, right, which just provide the right hooks and APIs that allow you to express at a high level without having any code that you don't own, and while having kind of the break glass to kind of break through certain layers if you really need to. I think of this as kind of similar in intent, which is today we have what is effectively code generation and scaffolding in some, well, it literally is, it's generation and scaffolding of a bunch of files that in many cases, like the majority of which a user does not want to be actively maintaining, but kind of are in their path of stuff they do need to actively maintain. And so this is the goal, right, is to move away from that entire workflow, or if not replace it by default, like at least provide for those users that would prefer this sort of approach, give them the option to say, we're not scaffolding anything, we're not writing anything to disk. Like all the stuff we would scaffold exists inside this library effectively. And if you want to modify low-level details, that is available to you in the form of patches, in the form of creating a new function type and composing it. But we are not going to encourage folks to directly modify files that we are generating for them at some point in time. And this is similar to the shift from API server builder, where we made that same sort of same conceptual approach. So that's a really long way of saying like the compatibility, like with the existing scaffolding, like we want to make sure that the emitted resources are compatible and effectively the same. But I think, and we may want to make sure that we can support, like for folks who are writing out patches in a specific way in order to get to the new state they wanted to be in, which was not the default state provided by KubeBuilder. Like it makes sense to provide a simple way of hooking those into Kustomize. But in terms of keeping this like file structure, right, of having like these different well-known customization YAMLs that exist here with specific lines that get modified. I think that is like a state we actually want to move away from, right? Instead of having like having a stable set of files be the API that are customized, it'd be moving to having a stable set of resource, like the emitted resources, right, and driven by annotations or label selectors or that sort of thing.
So I have two concerns. One of them is like, I believe that is very powerful and it can solve a lot of needs for a lot of users, mainly for like people with a big infrastructure that need to do different approaches, different paths for different environments of the same project, like development, production. This is very powerful. The other thing is like we have users that, for example, I'm not sure if all users, would you like to do a patch to update the custom resource, and change the values like the address, the name, and the attributes of a custom resource requires to do a patch. This could be hard for them. So I believe that we have two kinds of people, at least.
Camila, I would like to point out though that for both, like those two concerns are conflicting, because by necessity, the way that you configure multiple types of deployment environments is through patches. So are you saying that these are two non-intersecting groups
No.
of people?
I'm saying that it has a lot of different people that use the tool with different needs. And it has people that it has needs like that it is like very powerful and you would help them. However, a lot of users just want, at the end of the day, deploy and make something, image running on the cluster. They don't want to learn all stuff. It's very hard for them to understand how the Kubernetes API works. It's very hard for them implement a controller. And so they are overwhelmed about the things that they need to learn. So we thought 1 year ago in the plugin system to try to provide like things for scaffold the code for the helpers, because if you think what the users are asking for us, like I use the KubeBuilder or SDK, I create a project, I scaffold the APIs, and then KubeBuilder doesn't help me anymore. Because KubeBuilder don't provide helpers for I achieve my goal, that is make the application running and in the cluster with low effort.
It sounds like what you're describing literally is this project though, because once you scaffold out a config directory, KubeBuilder doesn't do anything else. I mean, KubeBuilder will add like some new samples files and some other stuff based on marker comments, but KubeBuilder doesn't really help you update that directory at all. But what Philip is suggesting is a tool that does actually do that. So
No,
I think
it's not my point. Just for example, it will not replace the implementation in the controller. It will not replace the implementation in the tests. Yeah, yes, exactly. My point is like 1 year ago we started to make the design the plugin system. Now we are in a point where we can release that in like in a good state, but a very primary stage. We cannot change these plugins. We still not adding. We are not in the point that we can say for the community, come on here and contribute with this project, create plugins to integrate with your projects, So my concern here is not accept these ideas, not to choose the point. But the point is we need to maintain the Go plugins, the structure that we have today. Plus, we started to work on this alpha feature. And then I believe that we need a plan, because we need to start to add value in the tool. We need to give the opportunity for the community, put things like things to integrate the things to help them test, things that will scaffold this stuff. So we will have two parallel things running that we need to keep maintained. And we don't have more than 5 people contribute with the project. So my concern is like, how we will make it easier for us do this process, because until this being a stage that we can do the replace.
I mean, if you have some ideas, I think they're worth writing down in an issue. We should probably move on to the next agenda item, just because we're getting pretty off topic here. But like, if you really do have concerns about this, then I would definitely start documenting them.
No, it's not the concern about it. It's just let me finish.
I mean like the general concerns that we're getting off topic about.
Okay, just let me finish the points that I'd like to raise. I think we need to accept this and you take like a year for you make it is stable enough for you make the change from the config entities. And now we are in a moment that we are like, okay, how will you do the plugins for let the people contribute? So I believe that we need start to think, I doesn't know how we will address that, but we need to regroup together and think about the strategy, how we will do the stuff, because we need to add this value now. We need to provide helpers for the people, and we cannot say for the people, okay, do this plugin, and in the next year they need to re-implement everything. Do you know? We need to think in a way to keep the both ideas running together until we will be able to do this switch. And the things that the people will contribute with need to be easily changed, adapted to the new way. This makes sense. This is my concern, you know, what we will plan for the next year, how you will be there, you know, how you will think about that, or when.
Camilla,
Yeah,
I think
I understand.
I think we need to move on now. I think if people have thoughts on that, they can respond in the chat. And maybe if you could type up some of that. I heard a couple different concerns in there. So I think maybe if you could type up some of that, it might be more productive discussion and issue.
Cool.
Okay.
All right. So for this, if there's like concerns, this could also just be done in a separate repo. Like this doesn't actually need to integrate it. I mean,
Oh, I think it's very nice. I think we need to accept and merge your alpha pair, you know. I think we are very closer to do that. It has few things like ensure that we have tests, things like that for we be able to grow your idea and put it in a stable stage. I just think that it will get time, because we are speaking about, we need the documents, explain how to use all options. We need to have a lot of options, implement a lot of options until we will be in this stage, you know. And we need the effort, we take a year to put a primary plugin system. So to be realistic, we will take a while, you know, to be able to do this switch. So how we can address the values
Camilla,
that you'd like to do.
we have to move on now.
sounds great.
All right.
I appreciate the feedback.
All right. Let's move on because we have a packed agenda. I think the next item on the agenda is the KubeBuilder v3 release. That doesn't have a name next to it. Who added that?
I added it. I didn't write my name, sorry. We are pretty close to releasing version 3. I would say that we can't even release it right now. I don't know what you folks think about that. There may be an issue with the release process that I have to talk with Eric, but I don't need to raise it here in the meeting. But I think that we are ready to release version 3. We have already had 2 alphas and a beta, and I think we are pretty close to it. I don't know if you have any other thought, or if we can try to schedule some day to release version 3.
Could you release it next Monday? Someone has an objection?
I think that sounds reasonable. I'm a little bit less informed on the like day-to-day of V3 recently, but I think if we're ready, like maybe not Monday, like I mean, actually Monday's fine. I was gonna say, like, if people wanted to file an issue, don't force them to file it over the weekend or whatever, but like there's still another few days, so
There is a release issue with the changelog that we have to update with sorting some of the pull requests. But if anyone has any concern about the release, please use that issue to raise them so that we can block it or not do it on Monday. And if no one has anything else to say about that, I will go on because we are already pretty late. So,
Yeah, just one quick thing on this. Based on some of the other stuff that's on this agenda, I do have some concerns with releasing 3.0.0 on Monday, but they probably are not that important. So we can continue on, and I'll circle back to this if we have time.
Okay. The next item I had on the agenda was to create a plugin repository, but I think that we can skip this one because we are a bit late and it's not something like important right now because we are still not able to change plugins. So having a separate plugin repository doesn't make that much sense yet, but we will probably want to have a separate repository for plugins and allow people to contribute like a community-based one so that we can separate also for the test matrix that it's getting pretty big right now. So having it in a separate repository would be probably the way to go, and using Git submodules to include it in KubeBuilder. So I'm skipping this one, just a brief summary. The other point that was raised in the triage meeting was exposing the scaffolding machinery that right now is under an internal package. I said then on Tuesday that if anyone has any concern about this, please raise them. And I wanted to also tell it here in this meeting because there were some people that couldn't attend the triage meeting. So the basic idea is to expose that directory because there are several third-party libraries that are copying it and using it. So if we expose it and we define an API, I think it will be easier for the third-party libraries like Operator SDK or similar. So if anyone has any concern, please about that, please raise them, and we will be able to. There's also an issue about that in KubeBuilder repository. And the last one is just a call. We have a KubeBuilder release tools repository that, well, they are the same reviewers from KubeBuilder and approvers, but it has like really low activity, and there are some issues that are pretty easy to review. So I would kindly ask if you can like take a look and give it a few minutes and try to also review that and not only control runtime and KubeBuilder. And with that, that's all the points I had in the agenda. We can proceed to the next one. It's by Camila.
Just to clarify on that last point for folks who aren't familiar, if anyone's not familiar, the release tools repository is where we store all this stuff like the common configuration for linting, but also like stuff that handles like release notes generation and checking PRs for titles and stuff like that.
Yeah.
All right, yeah, Camila, you have a comment about tying Kubernetes versions to.
Yeah, this will be very fast. In the last meeting, we spoke like don't bump the latest version of the controller runtime in the KubeBuilder release, and then release another version in like after really soon after. So I would like to know if it is really required because, okay, for controller runtime, we have it is requirements like in the Kubernetes APIs, release, do a release with each version, because has people that you like to match all Kubernetes APIs with something. But is it something that really makes sense in the tool? Do you really need ways that or can we merge the PR now and putting together with the release 3.0?
My 2 cents is yes, this is really important because Kubernetes likes to change things in between minor releases, and sometimes in release, like they'll remove some API, and if you're an operator developer, or a controller developer in general, you're probably targeting as many Kubernetes versions as possible. Therefore, you want to target the latest release before that API was removed for some particular API version.
But I'm saying about the tool here, like, okay, I get the KubeBuilder 3.0, I scaffold the project with the controller runtime 0.7. I can manually update this for any other version, as usually many user does. Or I can receive it in 0.8. And if I want to downgrade, I can downgrade as well. So
how do you know you can downgrade though? What if there's a breaking change in controller runtime between those two minor versions?
Yeah, I think this boils down to the fact that we don't have any testing for this. I mean, a different kube dependency version might or might not work. We don't know. We don't test.
Yeah, it is too.
That's the only reason. If the API libraries that we work with and the Kubernetes API in general didn't break between minor versions, then this wouldn't be a problem like most dependencies. But obviously, we're not that lucky.
So this is another point that maybe we need to start to consider as well. Publish more frequently the versions of the KubeBuilder, because we have not been doing that for too long. So maybe we need to see how we work with the cycle. You know, like in SHK, we have a period to do that, 3 weeks, I believe.
Yeah, I think part of the reason is that KubeBuilder is a lot more stable because it only supports one operator controller type and doesn't provide like CLI tools to work with clusters directly. So I think the release cadence doesn't need to be as quick as for operator SDK. But that being said, like I would definitely like to see more releases specifically around controller runtime versions. Now that we've hit 3.0 and have plugins, I think that's going to be a lot easier going forward. So I agree. Yeah,
because it is stuff we have not been doing. So if it is important, so I think we need to start to consider. So is that it's just this. Really, thank you. You can go to next, Solly. You are the next.
Yeah, I think I'm the next one. All right, so I just wanted to give a quick update on the state of the IDL cap and pose a couple of questions to folks. Basically the TLDR is that there's been some concerns about whether Kubernetes wants to maintain the IDL tooling themselves, and whether or not like the opportunity cost in Kubernetes is currently like worth it. I would love to get that resolved upstream. It's not clear that that's going to happen. It's not clear to me that that's going to happen anytime soon. Everybody's very busy and there's a lot on folks' plates, and things go fairly slowly in Kubernetes sometimes. So my question was kind of, would folks be interested in the meantime in hacking on some of this in like in a feature branch of the controller tools repository? Like, would folks be interested in, I mean, I think there's a few options. We could hack on some of the backend stuff, and just like have controller tools be able to integrate with some of the backend stuff, and some of those ideas, and see if we can like use that to maybe like decompose controller tools and make it a little bit easier to extend some of controller tools or write new generators. We could also have the front end in place and, you know, see if people want to start, see how like users want to start, if users want to start playing around with the IDL syntax that I had proposed itself or alternative front ends. We could look at that, but the kind of the general question is like, would that be amenable to people? Do people have interest or concerns around doing that?
I intend to hack on this. I haven't had time recently, but I will soon.
Okay.
Yeah, I would also be willing to like test it out with like my projects, CRDs and that kind of stuff and play around with it. I guess my question is the thing that's holding it up like user testing and that, or is it more on the actual like administrative side of Kubernetes, them not wanting to own this thing?
I think there's like, it's a complicated question with not a particularly clear answer, but there were concerns about like whether or not they wanted to own this thing. And I'd like to get those eventually resolved upstream, like I said, but I think we also kind of in KubeBuilder, we have a track record of owning stuff like this. So I thought it might be reasonable for us to kind of own it in the meantime. But I also just didn't want to unilaterally be like, hey, we're going to do this, because that wouldn't be great. So I wanted to make sure, like, see if this was reasonable or amenable to folks to kind of like experiment around with this as like a new kind of a next generation version of controller tools. With the caveat of like, we're not immediately replacing controller tools or anything. This is just like, hey, we have this out there, play around with it. Cause like, obviously I'd also like to get more user feedback. And like, here's a place we can hack on it. And then if we decide it's stable, if we decide, you know, we want to stick with this front end or whatever, or if we decide we want to merge certain parts back into the base, we could do that.
And so where would we be giving our feedback for this? Just in the controller tools repo as like issues and stuff?
Yeah, that's what I figured. People could file issues in the controller tools repo, and then like if folks wanted to like, you know, fix bugs or like point things out, you can go through the normal pull request flow and stuff like that too.
I think it's a good idea to get people starting to use it.
Yes, I think that if you place it there, there may be people starting to use it, but if you don't, it's gonna be like harder to. If people don't have it there to start using it they won't probably do it. So I think it's a great way to kickstart it.
Okay. I will create a feature branch and I'll start trying to move over some of the stuff I have and make sure it's very well documented and stuff as well. Okay, so we have a couple more minutes, I think. So we had some stuff that we skipped over. I think at the end, or in the intermediate. I think we very briefly skipped over the plugins repository. Was that like a request to have like a community plugins location? Because if so, I have thoughts on that.
Yeah, the idea is a bit to move it to a separate repository, also because the test data matrix is getting big only with a couple repositories, and once we start adding there, it's gonna get pretty big. And also to allow people to contribute theirs, but I don't know, I haven't still make my mind on how to allow people to contribute their own and all that. So it was just an initial idea.
So I will say, at least on the like separating stuff out, I could maybe see that, like I can see that could make some amount of sense. I think so. We have had similar efforts in Kubernetes before, namely around the Heapster project, where we accepted people's community backends into the code base, and it was a maintenance nightmare. Like people would go and contribute stuff and then just disappear and no longer maintain it, and we would be stuck with code as like maintainers that we didn't entirely understand the purpose of, or like was for a product that we didn't really have access to, or was for a project that we didn't really like, we weren't really super familiar with. So I'm fine. I think it would be great to maintain a list of plugins and stuff. I am a bit less on board with just having like, I don't think we should have the equivalent of like the Helm charts repository for KubeBuilder plugins. I think that's going to end up causing us maintenance problems in the future, or at least that's my experience with that kind of thing.
In my opinion, I think we don't have plugins enough. We have just the Go V2, the Go V3, and we have a proposal to scaffold a plugin that would scaffold the code when we run create API and pass an image, would scaffold the code, the tests, everything to deploy one image. However, I agree that I think if we see that it can grow, then would be requires a new repository. But now I don't see reason for that as well.
Why couldn't they host it in their own repositories, and we give folks, I guess, direction on how they can publish their own or they can be used? So that way we don't have to maintain, because I agree with Sully, what would happen is you get code dumps that are abandoned that you end up having to maintain. That is just, I've had that problem before. But if you have a mechanism where, oh, I've created a plugin, here's my repo. If you want to use it, then here's instructions on how to pull them in.
I put in the document probably before the next meeting, the metadata show with all things that we have been thinking about the plugin ecosystem. So in my mind, it would be like KubeBuilder should provide ways for people create the things. We could in the future have like a incubator stuff, which are not responsible for, like it's totally community thing, and the things are there, only there. The people can do everything that they want. However, we don't officially support. And if it's something nice and very good, be there and be adopted by the community, then we could define, okay, it's good enough to be officially supported.
I will caution that the trick with we don't officially support this is that in reality you still end up needing to spend maintenance time on it almost all the time. This is not always true, but quite frequently, even if you don't officially support it, you will end up needing to do stuff like, if you make a change in the API, you will end up needing to debug why this plugin suddenly doesn't work, or at the very least, you will need to deal with people filing issues that it doesn't work and trying to round up maintainers to handle those issues and stuff like that. Like even a repository of we don't support this still has concrete maintenance burden. And I think we have to be very careful about like what kind of things like that we want to accept as a project versus just encouraging people to host their own. And maybe like we can have a list of plugins that the community has contributed and links and stuff.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what Helm moved to, from the Helm hub to Artifact hub. So I think that's just a foreshadowing of what would happen.
Yeah, I don't think we'll ever end up with quite as many as Helm has, but yeah.
Oh
that's
yeah,
definitely
yeah.
a good motivating example.
Definitely.
I would be terrified if we ended up with that many plugins. All right, I think we are at time.
Just a
definitely
small
had a
comment
few-
on this, please.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Would it make sense to have the plugins from KubeBuilder and from Operator SDK together in a single repository, or is that or are there conflicts with maintainers, owners, and all that kind of stuff?
I know we were already talking about splitting Helm operator and the Ansible operator separately into their own repos. So
Yeah, the operators, but the plugins themselves.
they would live with those.
Okay.
That was the
Yeah,
idea. So
because let's think, the operator is a plugin, right? We have the Helm v1, Ansible v1, both are plugins. And we have plugins that are from the tool. So SDK as a CLI has plugins that is valid for both, plus the Golang plugin. It's valid for all. But others can be specific to Helm or specific to Ansible. Then you live in the divide the responsibility. What is specific for one thing, you'll be in that thing. I believe that is the idea. Let me know if.
Yeah, and I would love to see them as like, I think they make very good examples of test cases as like, here is a plugin, here is how it can live in its own repository kind of thing. And so like, I think it would be a little bit of a shame to co-locate them just from a perspective of, here's a demonstration to the community of how you can like manage a plugin repository.
yeah.
And then we end up in the thing that we probably don't have time today. And I put in for the next week that is how to maintain so many languages like Java, Python, Helm. However, because now we duplicated the code. The config is always the same, but we duplicated the code. So how we can maintain, because we extend Kubernetes. So one of my ideas was with Adrián was we extracted the config and make like a plugin after we are able to change the plugins, something a piece. start using a piece that we could reuse just the config, which is the point that also the config chain could help. So because of this, I make that concerns when we start the meeting.
All right. Yeah, let's talk about that next meeting, because I think we're out of time now. All right. So I will see y'all in 2 weeks.
Thank you.
There's a question in the chat about meeting afterwards, so I just posted a link in there for anyone who wants it. So I'll head there now.
Thanks.